And I also played. Oh, I used to play Conflict with my friend Craig. That was after I moved from where I lived back then to where I live now, and we played the shit out of Conflict. That was one of the first strategy games I ever got behind and understood what I was doing. So I actually thank that game for putting me onto that style game in the future. What else did I used to play? I rented black bass. Now, my dad fly fishes, and I fished ever since I was little. So to me, fishing was huge. So this Nintendo game, to me, was like unbelievable. It was amazing. Like, if you could hook aka a lurker, you were hooking a huge fish. And I mean, you'd play it with your cousins, man, and we'd all be having like a fish up who could catch the biggest fish. So yeah, I was pretty into that. I was also like a fiend for the video store too, like LaZyboy Video down here. I would call nonstop. Like if I booked a game, as soon as I got home from school, it was like nonstop calling until finally they would either call the person that had the game, or it would be there and they would be like, "Thank fuck this kid stopped calling us." But I used to always get whatever game I wanted, and I'll touch on that later on in my legacy here. But what other games? River City Ransom. Like that game to me was amazing. However, no matter how hard I tried, I never could figure out how to get to the high school. So that was another game I never really got to beat. But I did play the shit out of it, and actually, I was over at my buddy's house one night and we were drinking. And he was like, "I got River City Ransom on the Wii." So I was just like, "Fuck yeah!" And we played it, and we got to the same point, and I refused to look it up online, so I was just like, "Fuck it, I'm going to sleep. I'm drunk," and that was the end of that. I remember Excite Bike. That game was fun, except I really didn't comprehend a lot of, like physics, so I got wrecked quite a bit in that game by rolling over head over heels. I remember Friday the 13th, and, that was some scary shit. Especially, when you're wandering around into these fucking places, and I just cursed again, but I'll move on from that. But yeah, Friday the 13th was like, not only did it have the creepy music, but when you run into Jason and you have nothing but rocks, I mean, I've seen horror films. Jason Boland's parents were like horror addicts, so they had horror films all the time, and those sick fucks actually allowed us to watch them. So I've seen Jason movies, and I know what he's capable of. And to think that I'm going to try to take this guy named with rocks, So that game was one I also never finished. I did finish quite a bit of Nintendo games back then, though, like the easier ones, like Chip and Dale and anything like that. But the more retarded games, like Ghost and Goblins, anybody that beat that without using a Game Genie, man, I swear you must be a gaming god. I could not for the life of me progress on that game. It's like, oh look, I have armor. Oh look, I'm naked, and then dead. That game to me was horrid. That game to me was chewing on my paddle. So I loved hockey. I played Blades of Steel, which was one of the most amazing hockey games ever because the hockey fights were so epic. And then there was ice hockey, which was also amazing. I mean, the little guys, the big guys. If you ever seen it or played it, man, that game is epic. It's a classic. It's dear to my heart because I really enjoyed that game. Then I remember when I used to be able to go to my cousins at like the family gatherings. We'd all went to this one place, and he had pro wrestling. I don't know if any of you ever seen it, man, but pro wrestling was amazing. There was the green guy that bit you on the head, and there was Starman. I remember Starman the most because he kicked ass. But I also remember the green guy because, yes, he chews on your head. But we used to play that for hours. I loved that game. And so after pro wrestling, I think the next thing we played, like amongst all the young guys, well, I was probably the youngest, then there was my cousin Kevin, he was a year over me, and then so on and so forth, they just got older. But I can remember all of us trying to play track and field, and this was the old one with, like, the arm wrestling, what else was there in it? The swimming where you had to coordinate the buttons, the jumping, and all that. We played the crap out of that game. And it was relatively difficult. I mean, we actually came up with a system to hit the buttons faster, which we'd put a sock over our hand and slide it left or right so we wouldn't get blisters. And it actually had pretty good results. We were actually pretty much kicking the shit out of, well, each other. When in the game we were setting records. It was pretty epic. So, yeah, we actually literally had socks on our hands and used that to break the friction between finger and buttons, so the input would be at like rapid speed. So although we looked ridiculous, we did really good in the game, as I had pointed out before. Another franchise which I became and played throughout other systems was Mega Man. I loved Mega Man. Mega Man to me was probably one of the more lasting games that I've ever played because I fucking hate Mario Brothers. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I just really think those games are stupid. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that are like, oh, I love Mario. I don't. I really, really don't. I played them all. I beat them all. Well, before Super Nintendo, when they started making, like, Mario everything, I really wasn't into them. I just beat them for the sake of saying I beat them. And back then there was no proof, but at least you could say it and feel confident in it and not lie like other kids. So, to me, that was actually a pretty big part of my gaming life. Alright, right now I'm going to talk about Punch-Out. I'm sure everybody's played Punch-Out. I played Punch-Out and I played Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. Punch-Out is probably one of the most beloved games to a lot of Nintendo people, fans, whatever you want to call them. For me, Punch-Out was amazing until the Great Tiger. I could not beat the Great Tiger. I don't know why. I could beat everybody else, including Mike Tyson, but I could not beat the Great Tiger. Once he started that spinning around the screen thing, man, like the invisible, whatever it is he did, could not catch it, man. I just didn't understand it. I couldn't get the pattern. And so, as usual, I was like, hey, old man, yeah, fucking figure this out. And he's like, what? I'm like, yeah, man, I can't beat this dude. Come on, help me out. So, eventually, my dad, while I'm there and when I'm not there, gets this guy's timing down perfectly. And he does it via closing his eyes and just listening to him. So, whenever I'm playing Punch-Out, I have to get my father to stop whatever he's doing, if he's home, and beat this guy for me. And after that, I can just walk right through everybody else. And so, it was funny because I'd be like, hey man, I can beat Punch-Out. And my friend would be like, no way. I'd be, yeah dude, I can do it. And then, you know, he'd be over and he'd be like, oh dude, there's no way. I was like, I can get this far, then I need my father. And then after that, I can beat everything else. He's like, yeah, right. I'm like, oh yeah? I'm like, hey dad. And then dad's like, alright, I'll do it. And he does it. And then I'm like, booyah. And I'm kicking the shit out of everybody else. Because it was all just patterns, really, and twitchy. And back then, you know, I was twitchy. So, you know, pixie sticks, juice bag, all hopped up on the sugar, man. Really hardcore. But, that was my Punch-Out experience, and one of my sister's friends' father, actually, his name was Leonard, he was a Punch-Out machine. He just sat there and would beat Punch-Out over and over again. And if you ever recall Dr. Mario, well, my mother could beat that game on the hardest difficulty level. I couldn't even beat it on the easiest difficulty level. I just really suck at those games, like Tetris, Dr. Mario, anything involving puzzles. Remember I mentioned the whole entire square peg, circle hole, hammer? Yeah, that's me. But I'm going to stop here on the Punch-Out, and I'm going to pick up with the holy grail to me of Nintendo. I used to get the allowance of $5 a week, so when the 31-1 came out, I wanted it, and I wanted it bad. So it was the winter time, and I shoveled driveways. I lived on the street of 6th Street, so as you guessed it, there was other streets in numerical order. So I ran around and I shoveled every driveway I could for like $2. And I felt terribly short. But my parents felt so bad, they actually went out and bought me it anyway and said I had enough money. And that was awesome. And then I had the 31-1, which, well, to me, it was like finding a rock star. It was like, I don't know, it's hard to explain it. It was like when I put it in my hands, you know, have some people like, oh my god, I've been touched by Jesus. Well, I was touched by the 31-1. The 31-1, when I received it, and my parents actually passed it to me, and I put it into the machine, my mind had officially become blown. My youthful mind could not comprehend the awesomeness that was a 31-1. I mean, I thought of things like how many clowns you can fit inside of a clown car, or in my later years, such as right now, it was kind of like how many illegal immigrants you could put into a shipping container. And if I've offended either group, I'm only going to apologize to the clowns, because one specific clown caused me nightmares for 3 years. So I'm going to deviate from my 31-1 rant to illustrate my point on clowns. And you're about to see the main reason why I despise clowns, and that would be him. Him being Pennywise. So yeah, I was about 7 when I was forced to sit down and watch this. My folks were playing poker at my aunt and uncle's, well actually great aunt and uncle, and I was stuck in the room with the rest of the hooligans, and the older brothers were watching this movie. And I'd seen a lot of horror movies, but for some reason, Pennywise really shook me around, and I was terrified for fucking years after that. But what really blows my mind looking back at it is how he goes from being hanging out with the Muppets to being a child-eating monster. And then when I got older, I seen the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and then I realized that Tim Curry could be the fucking shark in Jaws if he wanted to be. But still, when I look back, and every time I even think of that guy, I think of this. And so I leave you with that thought, and I'm going back to the Nintendo rant. Alright, we're going to get back to Nintendo, and away from my dislike of clowns and the actor Tim Curry in general, and we're going to skip past the entire 3101. Not in that it should be skipped, it's that there's too many games, and I could ramble on about too many of them, but I will talk about one before we move on, and it was that Kung Fu or Karate game. I'm almost positive that game doesn't have an ending. And so, alright, now the next game that wasn't 3101 that seriously, like, blew my mind was Zelda. Zelda was the first cartridge game that was not black or gray. This was gold, and I literally actually thought it was solid gold. My parents had to sit me down and tell me different, but it was the first time I actually had a part of a game that was out of the ordinary, and I would show it off to my friends and be like, hey man, check this shit out. And they'd be like, what? I'm like, check it out, it's gold. And they were like, holy shit, it's gold. And I'm like, oh yeah, this thing's worth a fortune. Well, actually, I didn't even know what a fortune was back then, but I was like, it's like, you know, treasure or something. You know, like buried treasure. You ever have one of those? Yeah, I was on part of that. So, I played a lot of Zelda, loved Zelda, Little Hearts, Little Funky Song, and it was awesome. And I could go on about other games and whatnot, but I mean, I'm taking up enough of your time, my time. We really don't need that. So I'm going to put the NES behind me, and I'm going to leave this at a to be continued, and I'll pick up with the Super Nintendo and PlayStation in my next rant. If you guys actually sit through this, well, I'll be amazed. And if I see comments, well, I actually might, you know, keep this going. If not, well, I gave you a brief history.